There is no way that this court's decision is not going to distort the congressional process. Whether we strike it all down or leave some of it in place, the congressional process will never be the same.
Justice Scalia's observations, coming during historic oral arguments on legal challenges to the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, recognizes the difficulties that the Supreme Court will face deciding the law's future. But for all the tea leaf reading, we can only wait for their decision. Big, small, nothing at all, and expected in June. That said, as Managing Senior Financial Analyst Sally Rosen notes, each scenario would impact insurers.
The people who don't participate in this market are making it much more expensive for the people who do.
So all in, the Supreme Court decides to uphold the law in its entirety, and what that would mean is that in 2014 we would have health insurance exchanges and all the other provisions that go with it. Insurance companies today are preparing for that. They haven't stopped, even though there's a lot of question what's going to happen given the Supreme Court. And so in 2014 they're preparing for a world of health insurance exchanges, an individual mandate, and they're starting to think about how to operate in that environment, and they're working with states to start thinking about how to set up exchanges and prepare for that environment.
And here the government is saying that the federal government has a duty to tell the individual citizen that it must act, and that is different from what we have in previous cases. That changes the relationship of the federal government to the individual in a very fundamental way.
Scenario 2, that the Supreme Court rules that the law is out in its entirety, that it is viewed as unconstitutional, and as a result we basically go back to the world in which we've been operating in. The only question that becomes is there were provisions of PPACA that were already implemented, such as the minimum medical loss ratio requirement, rate reviews, some mandated benefits, and that becomes, I guess, might come up to the states to decide whether to keep those in on a state-by-state basis, and that would be a state decision.
And on something like the exchanges, it seems to me a perfect example where half a loaf is better than no loaf. The exchanges will do something. They won't do everything that Congress envisioned.
If the Supreme Court rules that the individual mandate is not constitutional and is out, the question becomes whether they will also say that the guarantee issue provision and the prohibition on pre-existing conditions, meaning you have to cover pre-existing conditions, is out as well. There is potential for a worsening of the risk pool in the exchanges, as the people who would elect coverage would be those, obviously, adverse risk selection, because those that would take coverage right away would be those who obviously need the coverage. However, the way the law is currently written with the mandate in, the penalty is pretty low. I mean, individuals will look at the cost of the penalty versus the cost of paying the premium. So individuals who are healthy and may not need coverage right now, it may opt to pay the penalty. So while there will be a worse or a slightly poorer risk pool because of the lack of a mandate, we're not quite sure how significant it will be, given the fact that the penalty is low, and with the penalty in place, some individuals who are healthy may just elect not to take coverage until they need it anyway.
When have we defined the rights or limited the right of government not to spend money in the ways that it thinks appropriate?
Scenario number 4 is that regarding the Medicaid expansion, there's a provision in PPACA that requires states to expand Medicaid to 133% of the federal poverty level. Many states are not at that level today. If that provision is ruled unconstitutional and is out, most states will not expand their Medicaid definition above what it is today. That said, when you look at insurance companies and their focus on the Medicaid space, the Medicaid managed care space, AMBES does not believe that will change, their focus on that sector will change that much. And that's because that's a growing population. Because of the economy, adding to that, more states are shifting the eligible population that they have today to Medicaid managed care to help control costs. Furthermore, states are starting to add more kinds of programs under managed care. They're adding dual eligibles, which are individuals who are eligible for both Medicare and Medicaid. They're making those managed care contracts, and as a result, we expect to see that sector continue to grow.